Okay. Thank you everybody for joining. This is the weekly group hug talk. This week we are not talking about solar energy. We're taking a little break. We're going to talk about sustainable fashion. So I think a lot of you guys are interested in learning about all things sustainability and things that you can do in your everyday life. So we invited Jess Schreiber of Fab Scrap to come today and talk to you about her company and her experience with sustainable fashion. I'm going to give a brief introduction of Group Hug if you are new here, and then we're going to dive right in. Oops. Oh, how did I do that? I swear I've done this before. Okay, so I'm going to give a brief introduction of Group Hug, and then we're going to dive right into Jess's presentation. So welcome. At Group Hug, we make ridiculously good-looking solar panels that are easy to use. Our main product is a window solar charger. It's a solar panel that looks like home decor. You literally hang it in the window. There's a built-in battery and USB port, so you can charge devices off of the grid. We like to say it could be your first step into solar energy. If you don't know where to get started and you don't know what to do, it's a great first way to get your feet wet. I'm not going to talk too much about us. If you want to learn more about Group Hug, the products, and other things we do, you can go to grouphugsolar.com. We do weekly webinars like this. I think education is so important to get people interested in sustainable topics. So if you go to our website, click on events, and you'll get to see all of the events that we have coming up. You can also follow us on social media. We're most active on Instagram at Group Hug Solar. We post a variety of things from like climate change policy to solar art and design to tiny homes, the Spice Girls, and everything in between. And then as a quick plug for next week, so next week we're talking to Kathleen from Clean Choice Energy, and we're going to be talking about what an energy service company is. The abbreviation for that is ESCO, and I think the real life version of that is if any of you have ever been at like a farmer's market or Best Buy or anything like that, and you saw like that table in the front of the store with a person with a clipboard who like asks you if you want to switch to renewable energy, or maybe they knock on your door at your apartment. That's what those companies do. And they basically will sell you renewable energy credits. So without getting too much into it, it's a really interesting topic, and it's a great way if you live in an apartment and want to go solar, but you don't have the space or the rooftop. It's a great alternative. So tune in next week to hear about how all of that works. And this is a quick plug for me and Emma. We are running a solar gingerbread contest. So it's open now until December 8th. We want to see gingerbread houses that you guys make, but creatively integrate some solar panels into. So if you look at this one, you can see there's some solar panels on the top of the roof. They don't have to look like this. We're really excited to see what you guys come up with. You can register at grouphugsolar.com/gingerbread. All of the rules are there and all of the dates are there. All we need you to do is sign up on a form so that we can help you with your submission. And the top 4 entries are going to win a window solar charger. And you can do this if you're a student in a group, as a family, with a friend, trying to add some fun. I know everyone's stuck at home now with COVID, so we hope to see your entry. And with that, I am happy to introduce Jess Schreiber from Fab Scrap. Jess and I have, I guess it's probably been almost 2 years since we met, and we actually live a few blocks away from each other. So happy to call Jess a friend and also an inspiration with her business. Jess, if you want to pop your video on, I will hand it off to you.
Hello.
Awesome. So let me stop sharing.
Okay, I can share?
Yes, yeah, go for it.
Okay. I'm just gonna pop this full screen. And I am really happy to kind of fast forward to the Q&A section. I find that to be the most fun when giving presentations, but it will definitely help to give a quick background about FabScrap, what it is and where we work. And just thanks to Crystal and Emma, I'm a big Group Hug fan. I actually have one in my window right now. FabScrap is a 4-year-old nonprofit. We work in New York City, and we help the fashion industry, interior design industry, and entertainment industries recycle and redistribute their excess textile waste. Prior to starting FABSCRAP, I worked at New York City's Department of Sanitation. I was overseeing the city's clothing and e-waste recycling programs. I also did some waste characterization studies. That's the picture on the left, where I was literally digging through New York City trash so that we could determine what New Yorkers were throwing away. And then right before leaving sanitation, I helped to pilot curbside collection of textiles, which was really exciting. A lot of people are very familiar with bringing their trash or their metal, glass, and plastic or their paper to the curb for recycling. But this was the first time the city let you put your textile donations at the curb. The city picked it up and brought it to Goodwill for you. So ultra convenient. It was cool to see that kind of play out. And I would say what I learned most from that experience was volume. New York City residents throw out 200,000 tons, not pounds, tons of clothing, shoes, textiles, home goods every year. That's 6% of New York City's waste. So if you first look at recyclables, the next biggest piece of the waste pie is compost, and then third in line is textiles. So lots of cities are going to start addressing textile waste soon because it's so massive. 200,000 tons, to give you a visual representation, is 14 times the weight of the Brooklyn Bridge. The Brooklyn Bridge is granite and limestone and steel cables. So 14 Brooklyn bridges are thrown away by our 5 boroughs every single year. It's a massive amount of material. And while I was at sanitation, I was able to learn a lot about the nonprofit infrastructure and how clothing thrifts work. And I also started to hear from brands about the type of textile waste that they had. And that's when I realized there's 2 different types of textile waste. There's residential, which is used items that are discarded or donated by families and individuals, probably what you and I are most familiar with. But then there's commercial textile waste, or pre-consumer. And that's all of the leftover fabric, unused fabric, or mock-up garments and samples that a company has and waste in getting a product into market. So they're discarded instead by a company. And it's really, really hard to get numbers on commercial textile waste because in general, that is a private waste hauler working with a private business, and they have their contracts and remove the waste. And so without a lot of transparency, the best estimate I can find comes from The Story of Stuff by Annie Leonard, that says that for every pound we throw away as a consumer, the business created 4 pounds of waste upstream, 40 pounds of waste upstream, which means potentially that commercial waste is 40 times greater than residential waste, and it's not being reported. There's no transparency there on what's being thrown out, where it's going, how often, how much. And so that for me was really surprising, especially knowing in New York City that if you're a business with textile waste, if it's 10% or more of your waste stream, you're supposed to be recycling it. So I'm gonna give you guys a few pictures of what commercial textile waste is. These are swatches of fabric. They measure like 6 by 6 inches, maybe 12 inches by 12 inches. And then the cardboard piece and hangers at the top have all of the information of the mill that creates that fabric. And all of the information about the fabric itself. So its weight, composition, the specific color, how much it costs, how big the fabric is. So we see these by the millions. Mills send these to brands so that they can choose their fabrics for the season, and sometimes solicited, sometimes not. Brands are receiving hundreds and thousands of these each season. And then once they choose their fabric, they throw them away. Cutting room scraps. This is once the fabric's chosen and you cut out your pattern, you're left with all these cookie cutter edges that are just paper and fabric and can be recycled. Mock-up garments and mutilated garments. On the right is a mock-up garment. We sometimes see these with like masking tape and Sharpie notes and still have safety pins in them. It's designers kind of still working through hems or pockets or belt loops or where they need to pull in a seam. And on the left is mutilated garments. Sometimes mutilated upon import if they're not planning to sell a sample, or sometimes they competitively buy and then we'll sample the fabric and send that to their suppliers so they can match the fabric. So we do see a lot of mutilated garments come through FabScrap as well. And then finally, we just have tons of extra yards and excess yards of fabric. There's many mills that have minimums, and if you're a small brand, to get the fabric you want, you sometimes have to buy more than you need. And there are ways to try and resell or redistribute that internally, but in general, a lot of this gets incinerated, which was really sad to me. So my first thought at the city was like, well, let's move this into the existing thrift infrastructure. But the problem was that you don't really go to Goodwill or Salvation Army looking for 6 yards of silk or a full leather hide. You're looking for finished used goods. And it's also sorted really differently. Those nonprofits are sorting for what's resellable and reusable versus what's recyclable. The volume is hard too. Maybe a brand has 40 boxes of headers at the end of a design season. Arts organizations can maybe take 4 or 5. And then industrial recyclers want like 4,000 as a minimum. So a single designer is kind of stuck in between scales there with their waste. And all of that is transportation and time. And these designers are so busy moving on to their next season. And then sometimes there's proprietary concerns. There's logos all over the fabric or very recognizable patterns. And so they don't want those on the open market to be reused. So what FabScrap does is provide design offices with bags that they can fill with their waste. The black bags for proprietary materials, so we know it can't be reused, and brown bags for everything else that we can reuse or resell. And we also get lots and lots of rolls of fabric. And so that's the first thing that we pull and make available for resale. We have our warehouse where you can buy all of this fabric. We have pulled fabric straight from the bags without the rolls. So we roll it on itself and call these noodles. This is our noodle bar at the warehouse. Folded sample yards, tons and tons of these. And so we've started to redistribute this as much as possible. It started with warehouse sales, but then we opened our online store where you can get scrap packs and yard packs and fabric by the yard. We started doing pop-ups at fashion schools. So bringing all of this designer material to students, low quantities, thrift store prices. And so this is really valuable for them on a budget. And then last summer, we opened the FabScrap shop as like our main distribution point. And so most of our fabric now goes to the shop. It's right by FIT and Parsons in New York City. And this is really the easiest way to get a lot of fabric, very high quality for thrift store prices. What we can't reuse is mostly those swatch cards and headers from the mills. And so those we bag. This picture is a little cringy because of all the plastic, but this is the cheapest, most organized way for us to store it until we can sort it. So for us to recycle these smaller pieces, we have to remove all non-fabric elements, paper, staples, stickers, and we'll recycle all of the paper. So still recycling happening there. And we do all of that with volunteer help. We have over 6,000 people who have come to FabScrap and help us sort through all of these fabric samples. And as a thank you, we let volunteers take home 5 pounds of fabric for free, which is a really great deal if you're a student as well, or an emerging designer. And then all of these small pieces, once we've removed paper and staples, get shredded and it becomes shoddy, which is this kind of pulpy fiber mix. We can shred everything except for leather and spandex. And shoddy is used in insulation, in carpet padding, in mattress stuffing. It's used quite a bit in the automotive industry for insulation. I was at U-Haul a lot when I was doing these pickups from the fashion companies and noticed their moving blankets are made of this recycled fibers. So it's a way to keep the fibers sort of in their life cycle and have their utility last.
Jess, do you mind if I ask a really quick question?
Yeah.
Where do you guys where do you send the material to get turned into shoddy?
We work with a facility in New Jersey.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, so it stays as local as possible. Most of what he shreds, I would say, is residential, like old clothing. Okay. And we're for sure his smallest his smallest delivery, but we bring about 5 to 12,000 pounds every month.
Wow. I love this picture because I feel like I was just thinking like, oh, I have like a carpet pad like that, but I never like thought about what it was actually made of. So
Yeah,
it's so interesting.
excess fabric. And because textile recycling isn't so far along that we can go fiber into fiber, like cotton back into cotton, this is kind of our best option, is this like downcycling. But it's thankfully got a lot of uses. The last time I was there, he mentioned that they're also using it to insulate food delivery boxes like Blue Apron, Amazon Fresh. So yeah, this is kind of how FabScrap operates, as like a closed loop of, we're providing pickup from fashion companies, tracking all of the waste, weighing it, sorting it with volunteer help, and then making it available so that makers can use it. And then hopefully anything they have left over goes back into the same system. We're working with about 500 brands now. We let brands choose whether or not we share their logo. So that's always interesting to kind of see how brands do or don't want to talk about sustainability. And then we let every brand understand their impact and their diversion by sending a impact report at the end of every year that explains how much of the material was reused, recycled, landfill, and we even convert that into CO2 savings and trees planted. And we're trying to provide a snapshot of this textile waste stream that hasn't really been examined before. And so we try and give some details of what's inside the bags. And our annual report is meant to like really make this public. And so we've got all the numbers, numbers about the service arm and all of the pickups that we do and the brands that we work with, numbers about the community that we've reached from volunteering and educating and doing events like this. And hopefully the next generation of designers is more aware of their impact going into the fashion industry. And then as a resource, the amount of material that we're redistributing and how people are using it creatively to upcycle and make, and keeping this material out of landfill. So yeah, I am really excited to talk with you more, Crystal, and answer questions.
Yeah.
But that provides some context of how FabScrap works in our little fabric thrift operation in New York City.
Yes, thank you. And I do think like you guys deserve so much credit because you created like a closed loop business like 5 years ago before people were really talking about it. And actually one of my first questions for you is like even just on Instagram. Actually, Jess, do you mind unsharing your screen? Yeah. And then that way people can see us. Mm-hmm. But one of the questions I have for you is whenever I'm on Instagram and I'm scrolling infinitely, I always see new fashion startups like compostable sneakers or like circular t-shirts and like all of this stuff, but like I don't really know like what that means. So like have you guys encountered like compostable fabrics, and like what is your take on these kind of like newer sustainable brands popping up?
Oh man. Let me preface this with like, these are Jessica's opinions, maybe not so much like FabScrap official opinions. I am excited to see the interest in more sustainable fabrics. Like I was saying, truly recycled fabric, like cotton fabric back into a cotton fabric, or polyester fabric back into polyester fabric, isn't really scalable yet. Like the tech is just starting to be developed. Textiles are like decades behind other industries. And so when you see recycled fabric, what you're really seeing is usually it's recycled from some other material. Like I even have a pair of leggings that's like made from plastic bottles. And right. Before I knew more, I was really excited about that. But I realized like what's frustrating about that is that we already have kind of a circular system for plastic bottles. What I would love is for that investment to go into polyester fiber, back into polyester fiber, and keep fabric in its own loop and not pull from other waste streams. So that's sort of, I feel like it's slightly missing the mark. Like the excitement's great, but it's not having the impact that I think we want to see.
Yeah, and I love your analogy of other industries, because if like, I'm sure hopefully everyone here recycles their plastic, but you know, like plastic is numbered, so you know that like plastic number 5 polypropylene gets turned into another number 5, or you kind of know how it gets sorted. But I think with fabric, I mean, I feel like most of I don't even know how much of my clothing is 100% of anything.
And that's what's so hard, and why so much of what we get is right now the best option for it is shred, because everything these days is a blend. There's very few things. I mean, maybe t-shirts, you can find 100% cotton t-shirts, but right now everything is sort of about the comfort and the hand feel and the performance of the fabric. And so you see so many blends to make that work the way that designers want. And I think in terms of utility of the garment, if it means someone keeps and loves that garment longer, then great. But end of life blends are really hard. It's hard to pull those apart. And the recycling technology that I'm seeing is only for 100% cotton, 100% poly, 100% wool. I'm not seeing a lot of blend technology yet.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And what would you say is like the hardest fabric to recycle?
Oh man. Like I said, we can't shred leather or spandex. Leather is not so bad. We can't shred that because it's not a fiber, it's a skin. And even small pieces end up getting utilized. Like we've even worked with puppet makers who are using like small pieces of leather, or jewelry makers who use it to like sell their earrings as like the paper cards. But spandex is hard because so much is moving toward athleisure that things you wouldn't even expect have spandex in them have a couple percent of spandex stretch. And that's really hard because it's not shreddable. And so it makes that whole fabric unrecyclable, unless it can be upcycled in small pieces.
Yeah.
And just for context, like spandex, also not a fiber, it's an additive to fibers. And in the shredding process, between the grinding and the pulling of the fibers, it gets really hot and the spandex melts. And it kind of destroys the machinery. It destroys the shoddy that's left over. It just kind of gums everything up. So that's the issue with spandex.
Interesting. I didn't even think about that. And I also feel like spandex is frustrating because I mean, I don't know if this is true, but it feels like it has this like exponential decay where like the first 2 years it's like amazing, and then all of a sudden it's like nothing. Like it's just not stretching any. It's like and then like what do you do with it? So yeah, that's frustrating. Spandex. It's I like what you said about how, I mean, I'm a product designer, so I totally empathize where you want to pick the material that it kind of excites the customer the most, because you like want to please that customer. But you know, what is the trade-off if somebody, you know, choosing between that performance and the sustainability? It's like it's a tough thing to be on opposite sides of the spectrum.
Yeah. I think that's where I'm really excited to see more informed consumers in fashion who are like, for example, Levi's just added this thing on their online store where you can specifically look at jeans with no spandex. And I know that's only coming from people saying like, how do I easily search for jeans with no spandex? And so I think as consumers get more informed, it's great because it is informing the design, and it's letting designers not have to like, have that conflict in what they're doing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like customers complaining and reaching out make a huge difference. Like companies want to please customers. So if you want to see change, like that makes a big difference. So I want to jump to some of the questions. We have a bunch of them in the chat. The first question was, will you start a Fab Scrap in Los Angeles?
Oh, LA. I feel like that has been a moving target for us. In January, I spent a week in LA with my co-founder. We were working with a real estate agent. We were looking at warehouses. We were ready for 2020 to be the year we were on the West Coast. And then by March, we were all working from home. So definitely was not the right time to be signing a lease across the country.
Right. Yeah.
So LA is definitely probably the next biggest fashion city and makes the most sense for us to be there. So it is in the plans. It depends on kind of COVID recovery, but all things were moving in that direction before this year.
Cool. And then kind of a related question. Let's see. McKenna was asking, do you have like a strategy and a bigger vision to sort of expand to all of these bigger cities? Like
Yeah.
FabScrap Paris?
Definitely need to work on my French. Yeah, I think LA will probably do in-house. I want to understand like how that market is different from New York, where it's pretty heavy design focused, but LA is a little bit more production, and understand what that looks like. And then what I'd really like to do is franchise, and let somebody who knows their own city, the design market there, the makers there, the community there, lead this. The benefit of franchising, I think, is that we have a good rapport now with all of the brands that we work with, and the data to have that centralized under a single home coming from all of these different franchises means that we're going to have a better picture of this textile waste. It means that we'll have more to share to show the impact. It's a value build for everyone involved, all of the brands who are participating. So I think franchising is probably the way that we'll move internationally. And that's like geographic expansion. The other way that I am like really excited about moving forward is we've kind of settled into a good rhythm with recycling and reuse, but we haven't really got to like that third crucial point of reduction. So in looking at what we collect, 75% of what we get are these headers and swatch cards. And they also take by far the most time to sort and process. They end up with the least amount of utility end of life. And so what we want to do is the same way FabScrap started with a working group of designers, bring together another working group, but include designers and mills this time, and see if there's a way that they can share that same fabric information, but maybe as a sample yard or maybe digitally, so that we're not sending these like 6-inch squares that ultimately get wasted. And I'm sure are really expensive to produce and send. So I think that system just needs a refresh. And so that's a way that we're also trying to expand beyond recycling and reuse into a real reduction impact.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, it feels like that's one of those things that, I don't know, they've probably been making those swatches just for decades, right? And it's
so
like
much tradition in the fashion industry.
yeah, it's like
Unquestioned tradition.
hard to shake that. We had two questions from Gozia who asked specifically about leather. Like, I don't know if you want to talk to like the way that you were saying leather doesn't normally get shred because it's a skin. Like, how do you recycle leather, or like what do you do with a scrap of leather?
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I'll tell you the amount of full hides that we receive.
Like a full hide, meaning like a whole
cow hide. But we
wow.
also get a lot of lamb skin. We've gotten leather swatches of almost every possible animal.
Oh my God. Oh my
I remember
God.
when this was very, very early, like when I was still sorting fabric in my apartment. We had a little swatch of kangaroo.
Oh no. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
wild leathers that come through. And so I know in the world of sustainability, there's sort of mixed feelings about real leather and fake leather and the plastic components and the ethical components of leather. And so that's where I feel like how great to, instead of like buy new, use what has already been produced. And that's where like I think the excess that FabScrap has is probably the most sustainable way to do anything leather based. And so the skins that we have, rather than going to landfill, find a new home, the small swatches, like I was saying, used by jewelry designers, used by puppet and costume makers. So they end up finding a place. They move a little slower than fabric, but when someone's looking for leather, we generally have what they're looking for.
Yeah, that is interesting. I also know I wouldn't say controversy, but I feel like people in the fashion industry and in sustainability kind of have conflicting opinions about like vegan leathers versus leather. Obviously, there's so many points on both sides, but I think, when you talk about like pleather or vegan leather, it's basically plastic. Versus obviously for leather, like an animal, had to be killed. And I think, I don't know what the right answer is. I'm wondering if you have like a take on that.
No, I don't. I think it's one of the like best pieces of advice that I've gotten on that comes from Kate Black. She wrote the book Magnifico, which is like an eco buying guide. And for her advice is it's really hard to be perfectly sustainable. And so you have to choose the things that matter most to you. And if that is animal rights, then do not buy leather. If that's waste, then maybe think about end of life and what that looks like, and or buy secondhand. And so the thing that is most powerfully speaking to you, it should be your guide, I think, in terms of feeling good about what you're purchasing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. Everyone has different values, and there's nothing is perfectly sustainable. Like, I mean, the most sustainable thing to do is to like not buy anything, right?
Right.
So, okay, we do actually have a bunch of questions, so I want to make sure we get through them. Rebecca asked, is there like a percentage of businesses or designers that you feel like are willing to recycle or not? I don't know if you're allowed to say, but like when you guys work with people, I guess you tend to work with the people who are excited about sustainability. Like, do you have a take on like how, like, is sustainability still a niche in fashion? Like, how many people do you think just like don't care?
That's interesting. And it's hard for me to speak to the industry as a whole because I've never worked in, my background is climate science and waste management. But I will say when we let brands choose whether or not we share their logo on our website, it's 50-50. And so that means half the brands are like feeling like there's a marketing reason or like sort of bandwagon reason to show that they're participating in this and they see value in it. And then there's 50% that aren't. And at first I was a little discouraged by that. Like, why wouldn't you want to promote this green step that you're taking?
Yeah.
But, I think what it is that I'm choosing to be like more optimistic about is that means there's 50% of the companies working with us are doing sustainable things internally, just not ready to talk about it. And so I'm thinking in other industries, I'm sure there's companies making similar moves, unsure how to talk about it. And that's the thing about FabScrap is it's so internal. Like, this is waste that never sees customers. They would never have to talk about it or share it. And so I think because it's not customer facing, it gives them a chance to take a step forward in sustainability without having to have all of their marketing worked out and all of their public facing information and customer questions answered. And so this is like a good way for them to take steps until they're more ready to like go public. And so I take that in like an optimistic way of like, I'm sure there are brands who are taking steps, even if we're not hearing about it as a consumer, because they're still figuring out internally what works.
Yeah. And I mean, it's almost more encouraging that brands are like doing the work and not necessarily talking about it than the opposite, right? Because then it's just like total greenwashing. Alice asked, do you have any suggestions for sourcing sustainable elastic and thread and like smaller things like that aren't necessarily fabric, but important?
So when we first started, we were pretty much like fabric only. And then brands were so excited to have an outlet and like a way to get rid of their fabric that they didn't feel guilty about, that they started asking like, well, will you take zippers, and do you take buttons, and do you take cones of yarn and leather? And like, it kind of, we drew the line of, if it is excess materials, yes, but like no hangers, no sample shoes, because they're hard to deconstruct. So we actually have so much thread and so much yarn. We've started getting more and more elastic. I will say it moves super fast because everyone's making their own masks these days.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So we do see lots of elastic. We see like the drawstrings of hoodies. We get a lot of like waist tape. We get patches. We get trims and ribbons. Like, we've even gotten like studs that you could like put on a jacket, like everything.
Oh, wow.
The full gamut.
Interesting. So we have, let's see, we still have a couple more questions. Two people actually asked this question, and I think it's a really good one. FabScrap mostly helps businesses with their textile waste. Like, what can the average person do with their unused clothes? And I think two people just commented like, it doesn't feel like there's any transparency of where to send clothes or like what happens to them, even if you send them to Goodwill. So do you have any suggestions for like what the average person can do?
Yeah. If it's of interest, maybe everybody can just do like a quick yes. I can kind of talk about my experience behind the scenes of used clothing at sanitation and provide some like context there. But the reason we don't accept clothing or work with clothing and just work with businesses is because I had worked with so many nonprofits who accept clothing, and it felt like there were already orgs doing that, and they were pretty much handling the volume and working through, they had their systems in place. Where there was a gap was with the pre-consumer and the materials. And so this is also just a little nicer for volunteers, not having to go through used goods. I have sorted at a Goodwill and at a Housing Works. You have to be prepared to find anything in those bags.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So it's also just a little nicer for volunteers to know that what they're sorting is never been used.
Right.
But quickly, I know that there's no open place for garment recycling, like used garment recycling. Everything is sort of framed on donation. I'm starting to see more for-profit companies enter this world with the aim of recycling, but the value of donation is that usually regionally, all of the used clothing is going to end up in the same place. So the value of donating is not so much that it goes to someone in need in your neighborhood, but by that nonprofit being able to sell it, it supports their mission. And for Goodwill, I know that's job creation. For Housing Works, it's working with people who are homeless or who have HIV. So it still has that net benefit of supporting their mission, even if it's not clothing someone directly. And so I would say about 10 to 15% ends up in their own thrift stores. The rest gets baled and sent to a secondhand market. And what's interesting about the sorting that happens there is not for quality, like, is this resellable, yes or no? It's purely by item type. So they're creating bales of men's sweaters, kids' pants, women's shoes, sundresses. I even saw them making bales of ugly Christmas sweaters. So those get shipped by item type across the country and all over the world.
Got it. Interesting. So it might not be as much about recycling post-consumer waste, but just like giving it another life through wear.
Yeah, and that secondhand sorter, if it's not going into one of those like item categories and it's sort of unusable, it ends up at the same shredder that we use. And that's why these shredders are like very few and far between. They kind of operate regionally. They're collecting a ton of used clothing. So even by donating, at least you're doing that social good first. If it's usable, hopefully it will get reused. But then if it's not, it's gonna end up at the same recycler.
Yeah. So we're coming up on the end. So if anyone has any other questions, please drop them in the chat. And Alice asked, does FabScrap have any relationships with the film and TV industry? It seems like there's so much waste in there because they create costumes and they do all of those things. Like, do you know anything about that industry's textile waste?
Yeah, we've started working with Broadway, all of their set and costume departments pre-COVID, at least. I actually am doing a panel next week with the Broadway Green Alliance. So they're like, costume and set designers are definitely paying more attention to sustainability. There's also a great org called Earth Angel who works to make movie sets more sustainable by changing the way that they do food and the way that they do lighting and energy. And so like her work has been really great in New York City, at least. And then, yeah, we try and supply a lot of fabric because costume designers don't need huge amounts and they're looking for something really specific. And so we're a great resource for them to get it thrift and high quality and low quantities.
Yeah, interesting. Emma, I know you work in the fashion industry. Do you have any questions for Jess?
I guess because how do you get the name FabScrap out there for people to buy? Because I know places in Philly that I love to shop at that are thrifted fabric, like it's called Jomar in South Philly. And it's the same idea where you can buy thrift fabric that normally comes secondhand from Mood in New York, which started at another like fashion company. So is a trickle down thing. So how do you make sure you can get the word out and fit within the other already existing fabric retailers?
Yeah, I think the benefit for us is that we're not just looking for the excess rolls. Like, we will take everything. And so it's nice for a designer who has excess to not have to be like, well, rolls can go here and buttons can go here and the headers have to go here. They can kind of just call us and we'll figure it out. And so by offering that kind of breadth of service, and I think now it's recognizable that they can trust that things will be saved and recycled as we say they will, that is really helpful, and that we kind of accept everything. But in terms of like people looking for fabric, definitely there's lots of competition. And so we just try to emphasize the upcycling and reused instead of buying new. And that tends to resonate, particularly with younger students who I think are more engaged in sustainability.
Then I guess because at the company I work for, we buy previously used fabric, but the problem that we've faced is that we want the swatches that would come with a new virgin fabric, but it's really hard when you order online or from a place that's not in the city that we're at to get those samples from these new type of recycled places.
Mm-hmm. We get asked sometimes like, well, will you send swatches? We are very anti-swatch, I think, because we sort swatches all day. That's like the bulk of the waste that we see is, and because sometimes we only have like 2 or 3 yards of something. And so to ruin a percentage of that for a swatch that may or may not sell, like reduces the utility of that whole excess. So we're kind of anti-swatch, but encourage like sample yards so that at least it's a usable quantity. You can cut your swatch, but then hopefully have some use for the bigger piece.
It's funny how like, oh, sorry, my husband's on a call at the same time. This is like work from home zone. But it's funny how like, I feel like when I imagine textile waste, I definitely picture post-consumer, like t-shirts and like old clothes piling up. And I never would have thought of those little swatches being the main culprit.
Massive. It's massive. If you come to the warehouse, that pile of the giant black bags, that's 60,000 pounds. And we do like move through it. So it's a massive amount of waste. And we're a percentage of New York City brands, but definitely not touching all of industry. And we're only design. We're also not really doing a lot of production work. So it really adds up.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. Well, Jess, to wrap this up, if people want to support FabScrap, what can they do to help you guys?
Yeah, a few things. Our volunteer sessions are open. So if you're in New York, they are socially distanced. Tables are 6 feet apart. Masks are required. We sanitize everything. But our volunteer sessions are open and you get 5 pounds of fabric for free. Our online store is humming along. I actually have a code for all attendees or viewers. If you use EDU10, you'll get 10% off any online order. And we're gonna have big sales, not for Black Friday, we're anti-Black Friday, but for Small Business Saturday and Cyber Monday, big sales coming up for that.
Cool. Thank you so much for joining. Hopefully everyone who tuned in learned more about sustainable fashion. I guess I feel like all of us should cut back on the spandex is like also one thing I'm thinking about. You never know these things, and I appreciate you coming in and educating us, and hopefully we can socially distance park meetup soon since it's still warm, like in November. It's crazy.
Climate change, man.
Oh my God. Crazy. But thank you everyone and have a good night.
Thanks everyone.